Recording in progress.
Good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
Thank you. It is now 2:30 on Tuesday, September 17th, and I'd like to call the Community Impact Grants Committee meeting to order. Madam Clerk, can you take the roll, please?
Pugh?
Here.
Livingston?
Here.
Barron?
Here.
Mackey?
Here.
English. We have a quorum. Madam Chair, I want to know that Councilwoman English is joining us online this afternoon.
Thank you. Next item on the agenda is the approval of minutes from April 9th, 2024. Do you have any additions, deletions? Motion and second to approve the minutes as presented. Any discussion? Madam Clerk?
Pugh?
Yes.
Livingston?
Yes.
Barron?
Yes.
Mackey?
Yes.
English.
Yes.
Motion approved.
Next is the adoption of the agenda. Administrator Brown, do you have any changes?
No recommended changes.
Thank you. I'll entertain a motion.
So move. Second.
Motion is second. Any discussion? Madam Clerk?
Pugh?
Yes.
Livingston?
Yes.
Barron?
Yes.
Mackey?
Yes.
English.
Yes.
Motion approved.
Thank you. We have two items on our agenda for discussion this afternoon. The first being the Community Impact Grants updated compliance report. That's on pages 8 through 12 within your packet to review. Administrator Brown, is someone available from staff to maybe just give a brief overview of the compliance report?
Yes, Madam Chair, if you'll recognize ACA Thomas, she'll be happy to do that for you.
Thank you. ACA Thomas, you recognize.
Thank you, Madam Chair. As to the compliance report that was in your agenda, you will notice that all groups that had received funding for FY24 were compliant, with the exception of 3 groups that were marked. They have an F/U and a date. Those are the dates that we actually followed up with them to remind them of their compliance report. I'm happy to report that since that time, all groups have now followed up with their reporting and are compliant.
And just for a reminder, can you just refresh the committee on what exactly it means to be compliant?
Compliant means that by the end of the fiscal year, we have received a report on their actual progress, as well as validated expenditure receipts to document the funding that was received by the entity, and that they were in compliance with our guidelines for expenditure categories.
And based on this report, there were 3 reports that they had to submit during the year. Is that correct?
For this year, there were only two because we actually didn't issue the funding until late in the year. So there was, actually, I'm sorry, there were 3. No, there were 2, March and then the end of the year, I do believe. I'm sorry. 3? Yes, ma'am, there were 3. The quarters all run together after a while.
So there are 3. So this final one that was in July is the final one. There is not another report to come.
No.
So at this point, is it a fair assessment to say that all agencies have spent their money?
Yes, ma'am. And if anyone has any questions related to the amount that were spent, we can provide that information as well.
Thank you. I'm going to take a minute to open it up to committee members. If anyone's have any question regarding this compliance report or any questions about compliance in general, I will open it up for committee. You recognize Ms. Barron.
Thank you. So I will say that initially when I looked at this list, I thought I saw some that were not on the list, but as I go back and take another look, they're all here. With some of them at different names, but than how we had them listed previously, so I'm glad to see all of them are here. I did, so when we look at the amounts that were spent or not spent, remind the committee as well as the general public, so I see one agency, they have roughly maybe about $1,500 that they didn't spend. So where does that money, what do we do with that money when it's left over?
If that money is not spent within the fiscal year, because this is general fund dollars, it goes back to the general fund balance at the end of the year.
And then, Madam Chair, if I may.
Yes, ma'am.
So I noticed, like, if there is an entity that did not do a report, like in Q2, there's an NA there. What does that mean?
That would indicate that they had already spent all of their funding prior to the end of Q2 and submitted all of the required information.
And so they've already, they've spent their money, which means they would not have a report for Q3, and then their final report would include what then?
It would just be a recap of what they had done with the funding.
So essentially it's the same, it could very well be the same as Q1?
Yes, ma'am.
And so I would just think that as we move forward, then perhaps we may want to consider, if a final report, if it should be different from Q1. So if I have Q1 report and I spend all my money in Q1, then is a final report then needed?
We would consider them compliant even if they had not, because if they have met all of the reporting requirements. Okay.
Okay, I'm finished for right now. Thank you.
You're recognized, Mr. Pugh.
So, ma'am, do we have people that are on our partnership list that are consistently not in compliance?
Generally, no. If we remind them of their requirement, they do meet the requirement. Sometimes you will have a group that may be new to our program, and at the first quarter, you may have to remind them because it's something that's out of the ordinary for them. While we do provide them with a list of guidelines, and in the grant acceptance document, it does specify what is required. Sometimes they do need a little nudge.
I got another question. And what exactly would be considered as incompliant when it comes to this grant, besides not submitting the paperwork?
If they were to spend funds outside of what they anticipated in their budget, or if the funding were spent in a way that was not compliant and the funds were not returned to us.
And these funds are based upon them requesting those funds, right?
That's correct.
Right. And so if they don't request those funds, just like Ms. Barron said, they go back to the general fund, right?
That is correct.
All right. Okay. Thank you, ma'am.
Here.
You're recognized, Ms. Payne.
I knew it was something else. Thank you, Mr. Pugh, for triggering my thought process. So on here, we have a couple that did not submit. So it says not submitted. So in Q1, they were compliant. Q2, not submitted. And then the final report, compliant. How is that acceptable? That it's not submitted?
Could you, I'm going to return that over to Budget Director Wilkerson, if you don't mind, because she would be able to respond to that.
You're recognized, Director Wilkerson.
Thank you, Chair Mackey. So yes, Ms. Barron, you are correct. We have a handful near the end of the list that were compliant maybe in Q1, did not submit the appropriate documentation for Q2, but then at the final report time did submit all of their expenditures. That really is, your full year. So when you get to the final report, it's really you're accounting for the entire year. So you're maybe submitting things from Q1, you may be submitting things from Q2 that you've already submitted, and they were kind of reconciling it all at the end of the year. But you are correct, they were not compliant in Q2, but they were compliant as far as it goes for the final report time.
And so I would just like to say that, as we worked really hard as a committee to get these funds out into the community, and the community, these organizations state that they need these funds. Then as they state that they need these funds, then what we, you know, it's one thing to have the final report late, understandable. But when you have quarter two in the middle of things, it just appears to me that we need some type of checks and balances to state, hey, this has not been done, and I'm sure we hold their funds or, you know, reimbursements and things like that. But I do think instead of just seeing not submitted on a chart, I think that we need to, as a committee, even take a look at, you know, how we want to really move forward with funding organizations who can't do the basics when we give those funds. So that's just a statement. And then the next thing I would just want to bring to our attention, as we look at some of these organizations that we funded, there are a couple that we funded quite high. And, you know, one of them I'm looking at didn't even spend a third of the funds. So as we look to the years to come, to really be mindful when we start to award funds, to be mindful of how we award funds, because it's apparent that many of these organizations perhaps did not need nearly as much as they requested, and we could have funded other ones. But, you know, I just want to state that. Thank you.
And I'm sorry, I forgot to do this at the beginning. I want to recognize council members Allison Terracio and Councilman Jason Branham. Thank you for joining us. And I believe I saw Ms. Newton online. Councilman Livingston, you're recognized.
Yes. Is it possible that someone may not have anything to report in quarter one if they haven't done anything yet?
So it is possible that they have not completed anything at that time, but we do still require a report. So there is still, they still have to provide, you know, part of our guidelines are that you provide a balance sheet. So even though you may not have spent anything, you still have to provide that balance sheet. So we would still need to know that. And even if you haven't drawn down anything, again, we know from our records you haven't drawn down anything, but there is still a requirement to submit the report.
There's no excuse. Submit all. I was getting that.
Yes, sir.
Want to check with Ms. English or Ms. Newton online, just to make sure, did you all have any questions on the compliance report before we move on to our next item on the agenda? Okay, thank you. So this really is kind of the format that staff will provide moving forward. So if there's anything additional with the format or you need it in a different way, please let us know. But I think this is a good, concise reporting tool for the committee to see moving forward, and it's been very helpful. The second item on our agenda is Community Impact Grants Updated Guidelines. If you turn to page 13 in your packet, it is time again to begin looking at our community impact grant guidelines and applications for fiscal year 2026. And we always want every year to make sure that we are reviewing the application and updating if needed. And so attached, you will see the draft application, and there is some language that is included in red. One, you'll see an updated schedule that will reflect the grant cycle period for FY26. And then also additional language that has been added to reflect some of our discussions that we previously had. One of the things I really wanted to talk with the committee about is really looking at our community partners list. And we initially had conversations when we began this process of making sure that we are reevaluating this list, that we have the right community partners if we want to change the list, so that we can create opportunity for others to join, or making sure we're not setting up a scenario where organizations are always dependent upon county council for funding. And so want to open it up to the committee for any thoughts related to the application as a whole, or the community partners list for consideration for next year.
Madam Chair, I'll start the conversation. I'm recognized.
Yes, Mr. Livingston said he's gonna give you his time. Go ahead.
Oh, he was about to talk.
Be
Oh,
ready. It's okay.
Oh, no, go, Mr. Livingston. I didn't hear it.
With our community partners, I know they, based on what we have here, they're all in compliance. How can I get the information in terms of what that means, other than meeting, doing what they said was going to do? How can we get to see what they really did?
Madam Chair, can you recognize Budget Director Wilkerson, please?
You recognize Director Wilkerson.
Thank you. Mr. Livingston, if you would like, we can certainly provide the quarterly reports to you all, and the final report as well, which will detail the expenditures that the entity requested.
To see those,
Just for the community partners, absolutely.
I can help answer it.
All right, Ms. Barron, you recognize?
Thank you. So in the vein of what Mr. Livingston was stating, I think as we look to review our application, for any applicant who's been funded in the past, I think that we need to hear from them, what their track record was and what they did with the funds, how much they received, all those things. Whereas it's helpful for us to get their reports, but I think it also, as the applications are being reviewed, I think the reviewer will also be helpful for them to see in FY24 they receive $50,000 to do ... And in FY25 they're receiving an additional $50,000 to do ... Because honestly, I think the ultimate goal I would like to say is that these groups are either expanding their projects or doing something different. Not that these funds would, always just continue ongoing funding the same project. I'd like to see expansion to what we funded in one year to the next, and whether it's something, a brand new program, or adding something on. So that would be a recommendation, especially for anyone, our community partners, and anyone who's received funding in the past. That needs to be noted as a part of our application process. And then specifically to our community partners, I do want us, and I don't know, Madam Chair, how we do this, but we need to have some criteria that we can check off, because it's an ongoing question. How do I get to how can I become a community partner? And sure, we can always say this is a staple organization in our community, but truthfully, most nonprofits think that they're staples to our community. So how do we? I don't know how we get there, Madam Chair, but we need to have some. If they, this is our criteria for becoming a community partner, been established, 10 or more years. I think some longevity is important that we include there. I think having some financial sovereignty is also important. Having, if Ms. McBride was here, geographic equity. So, are they serving the entire county, or are they serving a large portion of the county? I think that, to me, those areas are critically important, because it does say that, number one, you've been in the game for a little bit, and number two, you're serving a large portion of our constituency base, and then number three, you have the wherewithal to manage the funds that we're given. Those are a couple of criteria that I'd like to see us include as we start to create the checklist for community partners. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Barron, for providing kind of feedback and thoughts. I do think it's something we've talked about, and I do think we're at that point where we do need to establish what that looks like, and what does that mean to be a community partner, and how do folks get on the list? Is the community partner list one that is forevermore? And once it's created, no one can get on. I think those are questions that we really do need to answer, and so that all organizations know where they stand. So thank you for listening to some of those. If anyone else has thoughts they want to add, I think that would be helpful as we work to try to come together with some type of criteria that helps guide us moving forward.
Madam Chair.
Recognize Ms. English.
Thank you. And I wholeheartedly agree with Councilwoman Barron. And one of the things that we do is when we're talking about self-advocacy or something, every grant has to focus on that, whether it is employment, community support, or something like that. And so when we're talking about the criteria that's in place, I do agree with longevity. I do agree with proven service and the amount of citizens or the area being served, but also what is our primary focus? And I think Councilman Livingston kind of brought this up last year when he was talking about the seniors. And then when we talk about our responsibility in assisting with places like Oliver Gospel Mission, and just making sure that we outline those priorities and make sure that, like Councilwoman Barron said, that we check off those boxes, and that every organization understands that all of these things need to be checked before you're a priority or go on that community partners list.
Thank you, Ms. English. Any other thoughts, comments regarding community partners, criteria, or future criteria?
Madam Chair.
You recognize, Mr. Branham, then Mr. Livingston.
I did want to just echo some of the comments that have been made about making sure that our priorities are reflected in the criteria, and I'm glad we're continuing the conversation. We've got a great foundation, and it's still somewhat new, I guess, a couple years. We've had these processes in place, which I'm really happy for. Certainly during the budget process, we had some good conversations and good focuses that I think were appropriate when we talked about, in particular, senior resources and the role that they play for Richland County. From what I understand, in Lexington County, for example, they have a more of an internal county government provided set of services that serve that senior population that in Richland County, from what I understand, is served by senior resources. So, and from what I know, in Lexington County as well, I think they may even have their own dedicated millage. So I did want to, acknowledge the special role that senior resources has from my perspective and the population that it serves here in Richland County. And I believe as well, they have a designation or a certification, I'm not sure of the terminology, with the Council of Governments, the aging group that the COG has to serve the seniors within its jurisdiction. And so, if we don't name senior resources by name, perhaps we should consider making sure that we prioritize our seniors by giving some special status to whatever organization may be the recognized or designated organization within Richland County by that aging agency, just as a way to not particularly show favoritism to a specific organization, but the organization that is recognized as providing, as serving best in that role at a given point in time. Thank you.
Mr. Livingston?
Most of what I said has been said, but I just want to make sure when we make the decision, we look at our county priorities and what we're saying in our strategic plan, and so that way we will know we're doing what.
Ms. Newton?
Thank you, Madam Chair, and I was able to hear the comments virtually, and I echo a lot of those. I guess from my perspective, a few things that I'm not sure if were said that I would like for us to look at are, number one, making the community partners time-bound. I think Ms. Barron alluded to this, but I don't think that it's something that should happen in perpetuity for a few reasons. Number one, because county priorities can change. Number two, because we've seen instances where there are organizations who became somewhat relaxed in their business models when they thought that the county was going to be there forever. And number three, because we're calling them community partners, but the definition of community partners means this is not a competitive process. And so if you're really doing all the great work that you say you're doing and we believe you're doing, then I think that there's value in participating in a competitive process, at least from time to time. And so I would like to see us look at having these be time bound. And again, that doesn't mean, I don't want to call anybody's name, so I'll say Acme nonprofit. You know, if Acme nonprofit has been on the list for 5 years, or that's really too long for me, so let me retract that real fast, 3 years or 2 years, and then they come off, what that then means is that Acme, just like other nonprofits in the area, can then participate in the same competitive process and show the value that they're providing into the community. I think it's good for the organization, I think it's good for the county, and I think it's good for taxpayers. So that's something that I would like to look at. And certainly, you know, I hear, you know, senior resources being mentioned, and they do great work. And I guess where I get a little challenged is they do great work for the seniors. Well, somebody else does great work for the children, and somebody else does great work for the disabled, and somebody else does great work for the homeless, and then somebody else, you know, does great work for the parents who need childcare. And so I start to feel really uncomfortable when we have so many great organizations that are doing yeoman's work, where we're going to start to say, but only you get to have this, you know, most favored nation status. So again, back to Mr. Livingston's point, aligning with our priorities, but again, not on this committee, but it'll come to me at council, feel really strongly that it should be time bound. And then the next thing that I would love for the committee to consider is the percentage. If I understand correctly right now, the community partners get 60% off the top of all of the funding. And again, every time that we're funding one organization, not to make it seem dog eat dog in the world of nonprofit financing, but every dollar that we give to one, because we have a bucket, is a dollar we're not giving to someone else. So right off the top to say, not even half, but more than half, you get 60% that you don't even need to compete for. To me, that really does feel like a lot when you consider that this is the primary bucket that we have for our community. So being time bound, looking at a percentage basis, those are two things I'd love to see. And I guess finally, I'll just say that there's some priorities that if the county really wants to consider, I know, oh gosh, where's Jason, the city manager or county manager? Is it Dorchester County? When they wanted to look at how they funded, you know, seniors and stuff like that, they took it to the voters, and the voters said, we want to set aside a millage. And if the voters say we want to set aside a millage for children or homeless or for whatever, you know, I think that's great. But otherwise, I just want to be real careful with how we are allocating these dollars off the top. Thank you for listening to my TED Talk.
Thank you.
Madam Chair,
You recognize Ms. Barron.
So I want to dig a little bit deeper into the conversation that Ms. Newton just mentioned about the time periods. And I guess I'm reflecting on how when we appoint individuals to committees, we now have a process in place that says that you can serve for 2 consecutive terms. And once you serve for 2 consecutive terms, you take a break. And then after you take a break, you can reapply. In this case, in the world of nonprofits, it may be a little bit more difficult to say, when I say take a break for them, I'm not saying that they can't apply for the funds, but they are removed from the community partner list. So one of the recommendations that I've kind of been toying around with, and now want to state it in public, is to say that perhaps we explore, because right now we say up to 3 years. And as we approach our 3rd year, I think that I would feel comfortable with saying that, you know, you've been on for 3 years. So now that you're on for 3 years, with this checklist, whatever this checklist that we decide to do or not, but however we decide to create a community partner list, they have the opportunity to go back on the list, or they can go and apply for the funds. Part of me wants to say that they just need to go and apply for the funds and open up room for different individuals to experience this community partnership, because obviously it's like a gold medal in the world of nonprofits, and people want a piece of it. And you know, honestly, I don't blame them for that. So my recommendation would be to fund them for 3 years, and then after 3 years, they will go back into the competitive pool, and from the competitive pool, after being in the competitive pool for a year, they can be considered again as a community partner.
Thank you, Ms. Barron. I'm going to transition now to another portion of the application, but happy to continue to receive any thoughts and feedback related to the community partner section. And Director Wilkinson, I may need you on this because I do not see it in the application, but I might be overlooking it. So each year that we've done the application, when we look at our 40% grant awardees, that they have ability to apply for a certain impact area. And I wanted to review those impact areas because last year we did change them, and I wanted to bring those to the forefront again today for discussion and conversation about those areas, thoughts about changing any of them. But I don't see it on the application. So Director Wilkinson, do you know, or do you remember all of those?
I do not off the top of my head. I'm seeing if they are in the application that we just overlooked. ACA Thomas, or?
No, it was Veterans Affairs, there was education, food insecurity. Come on, somebody. I got 3. There was 6. Health, that sounds like a good one, Shakise. Thank you.
If it's not, we putting it on the list.
All right, well, we don't seem to have that. But those, I did want us to look at the impact categories. I think for our next committee meeting, if possible, Director Wilkinson, if you could pull that and kind of show us even a breakdown of what the impact areas are as far as kind of funding that was awarded for each category. One of the things that I recall, and I may be wrong, so if I am, forgive me, but one of the things I thought I recall was that I felt as if, no, it wasn't impact categories, it was districts. I felt as if a lot of organizations selected every district. And I do think in some cases that applies, but for some groups, that I think really work hard and are targeted in one or two districts, or really are working on a community, and they're able to really stretch that $50,000 and really show a change in a community. I do think things like that, I want to make sure the body is aware of, because that is an organization in my mind that took a little bit, focused it, and really helped change a neighborhood or a zip code. And that is a valiant effort, and I want to make sure we're not overlooking some of that, because oftentimes people just check the whole county, and it's hard, I think, $50,000 to really impact the whole county. And so I would, as we move forward with the application, find out a way to really look at or reward those that are targeting areas in our communities that are really needed, and they can be well served by the grant funds. Any other thoughts on impact areas or categories? You recognize this, Mayor.
So here's another thought as we, I know we've left community partners, but I would like to say that it would be helpful to make sure that our community partners align with those same groups, those same priorities. To Mr. Livingston's point earlier, those items have already been identified, linking them to our strategic plan. So with that, I think that across the board, everyone should be able to check one of those boxes.
Thank you, Ms. Barron.
Madam Chair.
Recognize Ms. Newton.
While I unfortunately cannot name all of the impact categories, I feel a general recollection that there were some questions by people who were applying for the grants as to what categories they fell into. And I can't remember if it was for the community impact grants or the ARPA grants. I'm not clear, but I do think two things. Number one is that whatever education we did last time, we might want to increase it a little more if that's going to really be an evaluation criteria that we're looking at. And then the second is really more of a question, is if we are required, and maybe that's too strong a word, to say if we are going to prioritize some of those categories over others. I guess bottom line is, I think we should continue to have the categories and educate about them. I guess I would like to give the committee and council a little more time to figure out if they want to prioritize one over or the other, particularly considering that our strategic planning forum is in January, and maybe we have to do it well before then, but I would hate to see us locked in to say all 6 categories get equal or this category gets double until we have a chance to really come together to talk about it.
Thank you, Ms. Newton. Okay. Any other thoughts, questions, comments related to community impact grant guidelines? I will encourage folks, if you have any other thoughts, to please email me. I will work with staff to compile and update this application for our next committee meeting. Knowing that the grant cycle opens on December 2nd, we'll continue to work to finalize this so that we can get it to the full body in time, so that staff also has time to promote it and folks know that it's coming. Ultimately, I think we have been, this is year 3. Yep, this is year 3 for community impact grants, and overall, I continue to be happy with where we are. I think as a body, we all collectively got around this new process of how we want to fund nonprofits and work with nonprofits in our community, and I think this is a continual evolving practice, but overall, I think we have stayed true, for the most part, to committing to our financial guardrails that we've set for ourselves, and to making sure that we really are working with nonprofits that are helping to impact change in our communities. And we all understand we cannot fund every organization, just like every day at home, we all want to support nonprofits, or we all want to go out to an event or a concert, and the way your budget is set up, it does not allow you to do everything that you want to do every month. And that is, I think, the same with nonprofits in our communities, and we want to support as much as we can, but I think we have to be realistic about where our budget is and the other commitments that we had to provide essential services to our constituents. And we have to stay true to the budget that we set for nonprofits and continue to give as many as we can opportunities to give back to our community. So thank you for the committee and other council members that joined today and provided your feedback. At this point, we are at the next item on our agenda, adjournment.
Move to adjourn?
Motion is second. Madam Clerk?
Pugh?
Yes.
Barron?
Yes.
Livingston? Mackey?
Yes.
English?
Yes.
Motion approved.
Meeting adjourned. Thank you.